Perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this very first Wikidata Birthday Series webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I also want to thank our panelists, Kelly Doyle, Rasberry, and Andrew Lee. It's great to see all of you. Thank you so much for being willing to participate. I'm excited for this hour today. What we're going to do is have a cool conversation all about the state of cultural heritage and Wikidata. First, I just want to introduce our panelists, and then we'll have our talk, and then we'll make sure we'll leave some time at the end for some discussion and some conversations. But I know questions will come up throughout the hour, so feel free to leave them in the chat or the question and answer section of Zoom. And we've got some folks working in the background who can help facilitate that. So don't hold back. It's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Doyle, who coordinates open knowledge programming and strategy as the open knowledge coordinator for the Smithsonian Institution. Andrew Lee is the Wikimedian at Large with the Smithsonian and Wikimedia strategist with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's an active Wikidata, making open knowledge connections between museums and research institutions and Wikipedia, Wikidata, Wikimedia Commons. And Lane Rasberry is the Wikimedian-in-Residence at University of Virginia's Data Science Institute, where he coordinates projects between the university and Wikipedia, Wikidata, and other Wikimedia projects. So welcome to all of you. And I think before we jump into the conversation, I'm just kind of curious, how do you work with Wikidata in your jobs, in your positions? So that might be some nice background for everyone attending. Kelly, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. One of the main ways that I use Wikipedia with what I do is working with our curators so that they can see where gaps are in coverage of things that they know tons of things about in our collections of the Smithsonian, but being able to utilize Wikidata to show them it's not represented here. We're not able to find this online. It's not in an open capacity. And I actually work really closely with Andrew, who's my wiki colleague at the Smithsonian, he builds really beautiful visualizations or knowledge graphs that show that gap or how our collections are represented visually, which is a really nice way that we are working together, not only to say, let's host public programs and editathons around Wikidata and Wikipedia from what's missing from our collections, but also being able to show them a visual map of what exists on Wikidata and also then what doesn't.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Kelly. And then Andrew, can I kick it over to you for some background?
Yeah, as Kelly said, we are doing so many things now with the Smithsonian Open Access Program. Ironically, it launched literally a week or two before the pandemic shut everything down. So it's quite a fascinating juxtaposition of Smithsonian February 2020 open access, and then all the doors closed on Smithsonian for the better part of a year or two. So that was an amazing kind of opportunity to kind of show why open access was so important. And Wikidata was part of that in terms of uploading metadata and content from the Smithsonian to have an impact even when the doors were closed at the Smithsonian. So I think one thing that's been so powerful about Wikidata is, Wikipedia started such a long time ago as with this tagline, it's the sum of all human knowledge, but it's actually not very true. If you think about it, it's the sum of all very highly notable knowledge that warrants an article. And that means there's a lot missing in Wikimedia's content, right? So Wikidata is 99 million. We're about to hit 100 million items strong, and English Wikipedia is not even 7 million articles. So it shows you how much is missing if you just think of Wikipedia and how Wikidata really is filling that role of the sum of all human knowledge. So that's what we're doing. And we're finding that resonates with museum and librarians in a way that Wikipedia could never do, right? So Wikipedia is about article writing. It's about full treatments and articles. And when we found that we walked up to libraries and museums with Wikidata, it hit a whole new nerve and a whole new set of engagements that weren't possible before. So we're happy to talk about some of those as we discuss that more.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Andrew. And Lane, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap with Kelly and Andrew's work, but I'm sure there's some other stuff that is very different about your position. So can you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. Kelly and Andrew are associated with museums. What they just said, I think, is representative of how many museums engage. This isn't just about them personally. I'm at a university, and I think that what I do is a model for how many universities engage as well. Just briefly, I'll tell you 3 different kinds of projects that I do. I mean, these are kind of odd categories, but one is I go up to other professors or researchers or students who are doing anything related to data. And if they want a tour of Wikidata, I give them that. This isn't the highest impact thing. That's not why I'm there. But this certainly comes up a lot that somebody says, I want to see the data in Wikipedia or Wikidata, and then I help them find that. A big part of what I do, I've got my own personal research projects where I've got these data sets. They're from the university, or I get them from other places, and I'm processing them in some way and then uploading them to Wikidata. For me to do that, I also have to download data from Wikidata. There has to be a mingling of it. I happen to work with a project called WikiCite. It's very popular in Wikidata. Many universities are engaged in this. It's a library metadata project. So that's what I do. And then the third thing that I'm going to say, and this is the big one, in computer science, statistics, and data science, there's a trend for all kinds of people to start playing with or doing practical projects with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so I take data sets out of Wikipedia and Wikidata, make sure that research students, graduate students, or even undergraduates sometimes have good access to these data sets. They do whatever they want with them. Sometimes they need these data sets for a purpose external to Wikipedia and Wikidata, or sometimes they actually take data that they've curated and put it right back into the project. And I think this is where the growth in Wikidata is really coming from, these artificial intelligence projects.
Wonderful. Thanks for that background, Lane. Thanks for those introductions, everybody. So one question that I have that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds in this call is Wikidata is turning 10. It's changed the way that our positions work, that we interact with data, that we're able to like build projects. So I'm wondering if you could share some ways that Wikidata has changed how your position works or how your institution works with data. And this is for anyone who wants to jump in first.
Lane, go ahead. Love to hear from you.
I'm happy to talk more, always. So there's a few things. So one is by showing people Wikidata, people who aren't accustomed to sharing data sets on the internet, they can see the potential of it. There's all kinds of people who are professionals in the field of sharing data, processing data, data science. But for people who want to know what new applications there are, you can show people entries in Wikidata, and it explains to people who aren't technically trained in this kind of thing to see what is the potential, where does this come from, how does it work. Something else about the relationship between Wikidata and institutions. My organization is newly engaged in data science. It's still forming. It's a forming field. And there's the technical aspects of this. There's also the social and ethical aspects. When you're sharing data sets, how do you relate to the public? How do you have conversations with the community? And this is where Wikidata really has expertise that you're not going to find in any other platform anywhere else in the world. Because in Wikidata, we have open conversations. A stream of ethical issues are raised every day. They get debated in these forums. And when an organization wants to see what kind of precedents exist out in the world, it's not unlikely that Wiki community members have opinions about these things. If you know something about Wikidata, then you can adopt the philosophy that the Wikipedia community has been developing over the past 20 years about transparency, about disclosure, about diversity, and including all kinds of voices, and not just having scientists dump things out on the public and saying, you get what you get. So these kind of community relations, I would say if anyone, a major strength of wanting to come to Wikidata, if you get tapped into Wikidata, you get tapped into this ethical network.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And I had the fortune of interviewing just recently in the 10th birthday, both the founder of Wikidata, Denny, and Lydia Pincher, who's the manager of Wikidata now. And I love this phrase that they use when we're talking about this ontological playground that is Wikidata. It's like we really never had this opportunity for folks from all different academic backgrounds or from different walks of life and different languages, cultures, to kind of treat Wikidata's taxonomy as this kind of malleable lump of clay to try to converge on some version of what we can see as a consensus that Lane was talking about there. in terms of how to model the world. And I think that's fascinating. It's messy. I mean, anyone who dives into Wikidata knows we got a lot of inconsistencies, missing parts, but boy, we've never had this opportunity before to try to do it collectively and collaboratively. And it's really fascinating. When it works, it really works in ways that nothing else can do. So I think that's one of the miracles of Wikidata in that sense. It also, I think, something that most people overlook, even if you care only about your little data set or what you contribute or what Wikidata can do for you, whatever you contribute to Wikidata is automatically relevant to 200 plus languages, right? Because of the nature of Wikidata as a semantic database, what you contribute automatically is mapped to all these other languages because people translated the properties or the labels or anything else that's in that sphere. And that's super powerful. One example that I'd like to mention is that, when we had the big Brazil fire at the museum, right? And that was a tragedy, and they're trying to reconstruct a lot of the exhibitions and rooms in Wikidata. I remember talking to some folks there who were trying to assemble it, and they were asking, like, how would you model this room? How would you do this? And they had entered all the information in Portuguese. And the cool thing is I could bring it up on my screen in English and help move things around. And it was immediately useful to those folks speaking Portuguese, even though I don't know any Portuguese, because Wikidata is a semantic database, right? I could look at the data set with my English language view. They're looking at their Portuguese language view, and we're moving the parts around. And I think that's something that a lot of people may not realize, is that multilingual collaboration is real. It's not just a theory. It actually happens in Wikidata and happens every second of every day. And we sometimes forget about the power of Wikidata in that area.
And that's what makes it so powerful for institutions like the Smithsonian or the Met to want to batch upload content into Wikidata. It can be read in, like Andrew mentioned, over 200 languages with one person doing the work. And it's impacting then those language Wikipedias as well, with content that we're adding, one person adding it, from the United States being read all over the world.
Great points. Kelly, would you mind going into a little bit more detail about the relationship that Wikidata and Wikipedia have with the work that you've been doing at the Smithsonian?
Sure. One of the things that's really exciting is that, Wikidata seems very intimidating for someone who doesn't have a computer science brain like me. But I've been able to train some of our interns on Wikidata. They've become big, prolific Wikidata editors, which is amazing. So there are a lot of success stories from going to absolutely zero to being able to edit Wikidata and kind of cross-populate between Wikidata, Wikimedia Commons, and Wikidata. But one of the most exciting things for me in terms of public programs and community organizing with museum patrons around Wikidata and Wikipedia is the auto population feature, especially with things like info boxes. How can we cut down on hand editing Wikipedia? How can we normalize what's on Wikipedia English versus Wikipedia Spanish through Wikidata? If the Wikidata about that topic is if the data is clean, if it's well sourced, if it's well populated, a lot of that can be automatically integrated into the Wikipedia article itself, again, on every language that it exists in or could exist in, which makes an edit-a-thon, right, a lot easier. We can focus on, let's add paragraphs of content. Let's focus on the things that we must hand edit and ignore the things on the outside, because we're relying on Wikidata, and as we get more normalized with Wikidata, being more confident even in what is in Wikidata, to make our engagement with Wikipedia, to make the editing and the ease of becoming a Wikipedia editor that much easier. And so the power of that, the way that being a contributor to the wiki world looks like 5 years from now, is really incredible. And there's a lot of hope in that as well, of how we can change who edits Wikipedia, who edits Wikidata, who contributes to Commons, which we know is so important, because right now we know there are gender gaps, there's representation gaps on Wikipedia, not just about the content, but who's doing that editing. And if we can kind of change how much easier it could be, or the tasks that we hone in on when we edit, that could change the contributor base and what content looks like on Wikipedia, which I personally find the most hopeful piece about what Wikidata means for organizing, not just for our larger movement, but especially in the cultural heritage space.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Kelly. Shifting gears just slightly, you all work for these huge institutions, which must have its own like set of dynamics and constraints and also benefits. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background about how that's going. Like, how do you work with your institutions? How do you convince people that this is worthwhile work? And how to, just shed some light on those processes.
Yeah, I'm happy to share just a little bit. I think it's great to see if there's a conversation, and it's nice that now with Wikidata having 10 years under its belt, Will, you've worked with a group called LD4, Smithsonian, and a lot of libraries work with this linked data for production project. So, if you were just describing, it's just a bunch of librarians talking about the real questions of how to do linked open data across the internet, and with Wikidata, the heart of a lot of this, in the best practices around that, right? So it's really fascinating to see some of the the Smithsonian librarians really engaged in this process of how do we model things at Smithsonian in a Wikidata way. And then also learning the other direction, which is we actually had some Smithsonian librarians look at all the different gender representations in Wikidata and just doing a massive Sparkle query, finding out what or the significant things being added there, and then learning from Wikidata and comparing it to what Smithsonian is doing. So that's really fascinating to see, is that they're using Wikidata as a benchmark for a lot of these interesting things. And I think that is a real feather in the cap of Wikidata that's being studied for this type of thing as best practice. Lane, I don't know if you run the same types of things, but this is something that I'm really seeing now that we didn't see 5 years ago, and having this kind of dialogue between the Wikidata community and these librarian groups.
Sure. I would say that the usual way that universities start engaging with Wikidata is through the libraries. Universities are repositories of knowledge, as are museums. And the general goal, so what Kelly was saying about all these contributors, so all of that is correct, but I'd like to emphasize that it's not just about contributing. As soon as this content gets into Wikidata, it reaches huge audiences around the world. So the readers are a major reason why anyone would contribute to Wikidata. You put the content there, it definitely gets used. So if a librarian is engaged in Wikidata, one of the first things they're going to say is, how do we get the special collections and the resources and the knowledge out of our institution in Wikidata, not putting it in Wikidata for Wikidata's sake, but because Wikidata is the portal to the linked open web. You put your content in Wikidata, and then all the big tech companies, they index it, they know where it is, they start sending it to every direction, as does anybody else who wants access to a free and open database. Wikipedia is free, anyone can copy this stuff, anyone can recirculate it. So I'll say a couple things about projects. So there's projects that don't scale. I work with the library. I need to have a librarian with me. We're taking these resources. It scales in the sense that it's data sets, and I upload them to Wikidata, and it's more than a human could edit. But it still takes the labor of a couple of people to do this. Something that's happening at my university, and the Wikidata community, I don't think is quite prepared or ready or acknowledging this, but there are a lot of computer science, data science students that are doing research. They don't particularly care about Wikipedia or Wikidata. What they want is knowledge. And they extract this knowledge out of Wikidata. They're studying medicine there. So let's download every Wikipedia article on medicine and get every Wikidata item that's remotely related to a disease, a medical condition, a drug, a treatment, a therapy, a hospital, a doctor, anything else. You just download the whole bunch of it. And there you have a nice free and open data set. Your legal permission is already in order for you to do this. You don't need to ask for permission from any human in Wikidata to get access to this information. You take it out, and then you do your research project. So it's just the resource by means of which, the foundation from which you get your data set. And with Wikidata, with a lot of organizations, if you want these data sets, you need to register, you need to show a professional need for this kind of data. You have privacy concerns. Is this data sensitive, secure? Do I need to protect it in certain ways? But with the Wiki community curating this, it's great for students. It's great for beginners. They can use this data set, and we haven't identified harms from anyone downloading Wikidata, whereas other kinds of data sets, you need a little thoughtfulness and ethical review about what can go wrong if I give this to students. So these student projects in machine learning and artificial intelligence, they're coming out quicker and quicker and quicker. More and more of these are coming.
So For everyone on the call right now and everyone watching the recording, what's one piece of advice that you would give to them in terms of starting their project or solidifying their project, convincing more people that this is worthwhile? You're coming from places where you've been doing this for a couple of years. What's something that you would recommend?
If I were to, I could maybe answer that while addressing one of the questions that Zico has asked in the chat there, which is what are the biggest problems for newbies, which I guess is related to that, right? And to grasp the concept or the structure of Wikidata or modeling, I think yes, yes, and yes. So getting started with Wikidata is not always the easiest, right? And I think another question in there as well is like, where do you start with Wikidata, or what's the best interface for it? And I think that is something I also talked about with Denny recently, is that, just going into Wikidata, looking at an item, that's probably in the long run, not the most ideal way to interact with Wikidata. In fact, the equivalent of a Wikipedia article in Wikipedia is not a Wikidata item in Wikidata, right? In fact, you could argue that a Sparkle query showing a map or a timeline or a knowledge graph of connected stuff is the equivalent of an article, right? It's actually showing you a lot more than just this little iota of things. It's showing you in relationships. It's showing you things in context. So I think the longer that Wikidata's front door for folks is look at this Wikidata item, the worse off we are. I'd rather have more robust, interesting things for people to look at. So for example, if you go to Pinterest, do you look at just one picture? No, they show you a board of stuff, right? If you go to Facebook, they don't show you one post, they show you a bunch of posts. So the same way, I think in the long run, we need that kind of interface for Wikidata. And the thing that is not so encouraging is that our community is not great at user interfaces. It's not great at advancing the state of the art of the user interface. If you look at Wikipedia's front page, we can't even agree to change the skin on the front page after a decade. So that means there's more need for folks to experiment with user interfaces. And I always use a knowledge graph as an entry point, honestly. So folks are asking me, like, how do you show impact? It's really hard to show impact to Wikidata. I show them a knowledge graph, and then suddenly you see these relationships dancing around the screen like, oh, I never knew that book is related to that movie, is related to that dress, is related to that actress. That tells a story. And oftentimes I'll think that maybe a knowledge graph should be the entry point to Wikidata for most people. So that's kind of my not so easy answer, but it's something that I think is a challenge for our community to show the relevance of Wikidata in a large scale, not just on an item level.
And for me, I think one of the most successful entry points, especially with curators and archivists within the Smithsonian, about why we should be collaborating on a project together, is actually about conflict of interest and notability, especially in the gender gap space where I primarily work. Why the question is, why would we host an edit-a-thon if some of this content might be taken down or is not notable enough? We're going to do all this research and it might not stick. It might not be able to stay on Wikipedia, which is a huge problem for the Wikipedia community. But this is a great pivot to Wikidata because we can batch upload these lists of names and all of the biographical information behind it and have that in Wikidata because the notability threshold is lower, which is really significant to then use what we put in Wikidata to build a case for later Wikipedia article creation or Wikipedia engagement. This has been really key for how we get new curators and new Smithsonian museums thinking about Wikidata, I can't speak today, as it relates to gender, is let's put it on Wikidata first. Let's just pull all of this biographical information and put it onto Wikidata. Or if you're doing an exhibit about women's issues, women's studies, let's put all of that exhibit information into Wikidata and let it sit there for a while as we're working through and compiling more sourcing for standalone Wikipedia articles. And this has been a really successful way that we're thinking about Wikidata in terms of gender gaps and other types of gaps that live on Wikipedia.
I agree with Andrew. I agree with Kelly. So one of the things Andrew said was that the interface is troublesome. I confirm the interface is in fact troublesome. Kelly was saying, upload this gender gap information. And I'd like to remark, that's not a typical data set. You can't just take personal information and put it into Wikidata, you should have some negotiations about the social and ethical issues with the Wikidata community before you do this. So she was saying upload gender information. I'm with Wikimedia LGBT. We have some lists, verified information, good data of who is LGBT and what kind of LGBT are they. We do not just mass upload that and apply that to all kinds of people's biographies. There's some social issues we have to talk about before labeling people by their sexuality, even if that data is public and available in other sources. So if you're saying, how do new people get involved in Wikidata? If it's at all possible, like this is the way. This is the way. You invite a Wikidata editor for coffee and you chat with them. And then if you really need to go into Wikidata and do something, instead of asking questions first or spending too much time reading the tutorials, read the tutorials you need to be able to make some edits, whatever the case may be. And as soon as possible, as soon as you have anything whatsoever to show, take that to a human in one of the public forums and try to start an online conversation. See if you can segue that into an in-person conversation or an invitation to an online event where you can join a conversation some other way. Human to human, that's the way.
A lot of good advice right there. Thank you all for sharing that. And this actually is a great lead into AJ's question. Thanks for asking this, AJ. And it's what makes a data set a good addition to Wikidata. AJ would like to encourage some digital humanities projects to upload their data.
I'll remark on something briefly. Like this is a fundamental challenge in Wikidata, and it's confusing to just about anybody who works in the field. So Wikidata is a repository of data. It's not a repository of data sets. So supposing a library or an institution has an excellent data set and they want to hang it on the side of Wikidata somehow, upload the data set, and then by and by integrate that static data set that's unchanging into Wikidata. You can't do that. We do not have a repository of unchanging data set files in Wikidata. And so if somebody's got a complete collection to upload, it's hard to track like what percentage and what data from that data set is integrated with Wikidata, where are the differences between Wikidata reporting one thing and then the data set being different in another ways. Like biographical data, you start uploading this and then some birthdays are different, some other details are different. Like how do you reconcile that with Wikidata? So again, it takes some negotiation with the Wiki community to say, what are you going to do with this data set? How fast are you going to do it? Are you going to upload a bunch of stuff that Wikidata can't take? You should have a conversation with a human. There's no other way.
Yeah, I agree with Lane, although a conversation with a human is not the most efficient way or to do at scale. But unfortunately, at this point, is probably the most effective because there's so many dimensions to Wikidata. And you never know exactly what the folks are starting from, with whether they have a data set already, whether they don't have a data set already, and then where they want to go, right? So in the chat, I put a link to a grid that I tried to assemble pretty much any and every tool that you might want to know about when you're on your journey, what we call the Wikidata journey, from like where you are to where you want to go. And I know there's a lot of tools, a lot of different things that to keep in mind that might be dizzying, but at least that one page tries to distill down into one view all the major tools we have that you should pay attention to, including some advice on what you might use them for, and for folks at different skill levels, right? So that is, it took a long time to assemble that page because we don't do a great job of documentation either. So as much as we're like saying Wikidata is awesome, we're like identifying a lot of shortcomings in being able to do it at scale and to document ourselves. I guess it's good news that we're pouring most of our resources into the technical implementation, but we need to catch up with a lot of the user interface and the documentation. But that one shot, which is the linked open data workflow, which is not even the best description of what that is just kind of like a 10,000 foot view of all the Wikidata tools that people might be interested in.
And I will say that while our community isn't always the best at documentation, there are some really wonderful tutorials on YouTube that I point my interns to all the time, that I'll go back and reference myself if I forget to do a basic task on Wikidata, which is a lot. There really are some great ones. Andrew has a wonderful one that I point people to. If you just go to YouTube and type in Wikidata tutorial, find probably 100 of them. So definitely seek those out if you're looking to familiarize yourself or remind yourself of Wikidata tasks, because even if we do have this documentation, like Andrew pointed out, it can be really difficult to find and navigate to, even if you type this into Google. There are really great tutorials that I urge you to take a look at.
Yeah, and Kelly's done a great job of, now we're entering our third year of training interns at the Smithsonian. And, just 5 years ago, this is a dream of like, what if we could train on a regular basis, interns at anywhere, but at least at the Smithsonian, of not just Wikipedia, but all the stuff. And we've been doing this now for 2-3 years. And we found that, Wikidata is a really nice on-ramp for a lot of folks, right? Because it's so structured. It kind of demands that if you put something in, you should add a reference, since even all there staring at you in the face, in a way that might be easier in many cases than Wikipedia. So it's a nice way to flesh that out. I think Jamie mentioned that in the chat, is it's a nice way to flesh out all the necessary stuff. Then suddenly you're like 80% there to creating a Wikipedia article. And we've even oriented some editathons now around Wikidata first to make that explicit.
You might have started to answer the question I was going to ask next, so feel free to just say covered. But I'm wondering, for the three of you, coming from such different places and skill sets and goals, how do you measure success, either personally or professionally, on Wikidata? Like, how do you know good work is happening? What do you look for? What's changed? Just kind of curious.
Success for me is curators at the Smithsonian going to Wikipedia and Wikidata first before they come to ask me a question. A great example of this is if the Smithsonian, I'm going to be vague, but the Smithsonian was giving someone an award, and we had done work with their curators previously on Wikidata and Wikipedia gaps. And so while they were giving, about to do the announcement for the award, the curators went to Wikipedia and then to Wikidata to see if this individual had any coverage there, and they hadn't. So they emailed Andrew and I to, kind of scurry and get that done. That is a huge win for me. They didn't just go to Wikipedia and say, there's no article. They also went to Wikidata, which 3 years ago never ever would have happened. And that seems like such a small and minute win, but our curators and archivists having that in their toolbox, and that's something in their workflow to go through the three main platforms of Commons, Wikidata, and Wikipedia to do this checking up, actually is a huge win that we can continue to build and build and build upon.
Yeah, and related to that, I think in general for the space we work in, I don't mean to drill down too hard on like GLAM and museums, but I think it's a good it's a good indicator of kind of what the uptake is in certain sectors. I think a big win was if you go to the Museum of Modern Art, for example, and look at their artist pages. So if you look at a painting or something, you say, oh, who's the artist? And you go to the artist page on MoMA. They now have the Wikidata Q number on that page. Not Getty, which is the traditional powerhouse in identifying artists. They're putting the Wikidata Q number because Wikidata's data set is much bigger than Getty, ULAN, or any of the other traditional arts databases that are out there. I think that's a big win. It's already seeing that Wikidata is up front and center as being kind of the authoritative place to disambiguate and to have linked open data, right? If you go to Wikidata, you can find all the other links that you are interested in from there. Similarly, at the Met, we've worked to now incorporate Q numbers in the API, right? So an API is when you want to write a computer program and you want to ask the database at the Met, oh, who made that painting? It'll now pass back Wikidata Q numbers as the artist. And that gives you hyper precise information about who that artist is. And it wasn't even hard for them to be convinced of that. They're like, no, we absolutely should do Wikidata because it's the biggest arts database we know of in the world. And I think that's a good measure of success too. And the similar thing that we're doing now at the Smithsonian, incorporating Wikidata into all the backend databases. So I think it's not, the good news is not even hard to convince folks. Now it's just a matter of implementation. So that's a big win.
I agree with Andrew that this propagation of Wikidata identifiers to other databases, now they point at each other. That's a measure of success, but I don't think that's a measure of success that's broadly celebrated in the world. And indeed, I don't think many people, even experts in the field, realize just how quickly and how deeply Wikidata identifiers are spreading and getting copied everywhere. I think when more people recognize it, they're going to come to a greater realization of just how big of a deal Wikidata is. I'd like to compare Wikidata to Wikipedia. A measure of success in Wikipedia, in my view, is how many times people are reading the articles. And with Wikipedia articles, there's a page view tools. You can see how many people are reading the different Wikipedia articles. It's harder to detect that in Wikidata. If data's in Wikidata, I see that data spreading out everywhere, but there's not a single tool that says this data originated in Wikidata, and from here it's spread out around the internet. I believe that it's happening, but it's hard for me to imagine how to even detect the spread of information from Wikidata elsewhere to the internet. I'm at a university, so this is another traditional success metric. I'm going to mention it because it doesn't work well for Wikidata. I keep thinking about how to do this, but traditional academic publishing. So supposing you have a researcher and they've developed Wikidata a lot, they don't get conventional academic credit for a publication. It's not obvious if you curate a data set and you share it in Wikidata, how this goes into your CV or how anyone even finds out that you've done this. And Wikidata editors in general, they're under-recognized. They care a lot about this. And the success metric that I do care about the most, and I think this is the most motivating one, even though it's hard to measure, is contributor satisfaction. The reason why people are contributing to Wikidata is even if they can't measure the page views, even if they're not getting professional recognition in a CV for what they're doing, people do this and they talk to their peers and they say, I got this benefit from Wikidata. It was very powerful for me. I'm going to be doing this again, and I encourage you to check it out. It's hard to measure how often that happens, but in my world, I'm seeing a lot of people say this over and over again. We have students who have never edited Wikidata or know much about data sets. They come in, they have successful projects. They say, I love this. I'm so glad you introduced me to this. And then they go on with their careers. This is happening routinely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Lane there. I mean, something that Kelly and I, and pretty much anyone in this GLAM space struggles with is how to show impact of Wikidata, because people are just used to the, page views for HTML content or page views for Wikipedia. And it's completely different dimension with Wikidata. I mean, just the nature of linked open data is no one ever downloads it, right? They point to it, they refer to it, they interact with that content in a different way than with page views or downloading images. So that is the toughest part, I think, going forward, is that fortunately if you're fortunate enough, you'll have an organization that recognizes all these kind of ancillary benefits, and you can demonstrate things that resonate with the mission as it's constructed. But in terms of saying, hey, you're going to get exactly this much percentage boost, that's really hard to show. So we're always finding new and novel ways. And if people have ideas in the chat, please add them, because there's no easy answer to this. But we need to keep proving Wikidata's worth as we go forward.
I think in my capacity, I teach a lot of courses and we work with a lot of professional institutions. And it might sound simplistic, but representation is huge. Like if you're not on Wikidata, you can't be linked to all these other things. And I think, Andrew, you were mentioning this earlier. Once you're there, you're there. And so being more deliberate about what's there versus what's not is actually pretty radical. And being more thorough and accurate with all the data, I think has a huge impact. And that's a good measure of success, or at least I tell myself that.
And Lane definitely emphasized this before, but it's important to remind folks how crucial Wikidata is to the fabric of knowledge now, not only for Google or for Amazon, and they're all using Wikidata on massive levels. You know, they have their own internal knowledge graph databases, but they heavily draw on Wikidata because it's the only one that's being grown and curated so actively, right? Compared to other folks who have to maintain their own. And as Lane also said, it's being massively used in AI now for training, for trying to understand the world. For better, for worse, it can be a little scary to think that, oh my God, you're depending on Wikidata for the future of humanity. But it is, you know, the best assembly so far of human knowledge. So that is a challenge to work with Wikidata in those ways.
And one of the things too that Andrew and I have been working on with curators and experts at the Smithsonian is appropriate and up-to-date correct terminology on Wikidata, to make sure that we're taking out outdated information that could be harmful or outdated terminology, which, as Lane mentioned earlier, can be a big problem, you know, on Wikidata, especially because this information is moving and being, you know, zoomed around so much. We do have a responsibility to make sure that things are correct on Wikipedia, and even things like dead naming, or Wikidata, even things like dead naming, and how our community, hopefully in the next few years here very quickly, comes up with more normalized rules and functions for this type of terminology or taking out harmful information. And that's something Andrew and I have been trying to work really quickly on. How can we get updated information onto Wikidata from our curators, and making sure that we're doing this within every museum and unit that we have.
That's well put. Well, I noticed we've been gathering some great questions, and I want to leave some time to answer all of them, but I do have one more for you. And this is a fun one, at least for me to think about. So Wikidata is turning 10, which is fantastic. Where do you see Wikidata when it turns 15? How will it change your institution? How will it change your job? What's like your, if I had endless resources, dream come true situation for Wikidata 5 years down the line? Feel free to mull it over for a second.
I can do a quick answer. I think we haven't even talked about structured data on Commons yet, but if folks don't know much about that, I think that is, depending on your viewpoint, a enhancement or augmentation of Wikimedia Commons as a multimedia repository with Wikidata-like functions, or you could say, if you're not a fan of it, it's infected Wikimedia Commons with those functions. But I think it's so powerful right now, and it's amazing how much, you know, if you say, take the best of a multimedia database, which is Wikimedia Commons, and graft on all that wonderful Wikibase, i.e. Wikidata function onto it. Now you have amazing stuff that can get you information about depictions and what's in the image. And Commons is not really a great multimedia environment. So suddenly you have the multilingual. Commons is not very multilingual. So now you have the multilingual capabilities of Wikidata in Commons, which solves a long-term problem there. So I think that is one of the brightest futures I see, is that as we have more Wikidata-like functions on Commons, that's, you know, even become the first point of contribution for a lot of museums now, saying, I've got this large image repository, I've got the structured data. You know, it's like peanut butter and chocolate together. You know, it's great combination that we have with Wikimedia Commons and structured data. So I think that's bright. And I just think just scaling up Wikidata, if people don't know, there's a massive, you know, effort now to replace the back end of Wikidata with something that can handle much more than it does now. You know, we were kind of shocked to learn a few months ago, like, oh yeah, Wikidata query crashes all the time. We think it's pretty reliable, but we've got a whole engineering team on the back end trying to hold the train together as it's rumbling down the tracks. So just the technical implementation getting more robust and not having, you know, query timeouts and things like that is something we're looking forward to as well.
I'll review some of the, so we're looking at what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years in the future. So Andrew mentioned this, more big tech in Wikidata, for good and bad, mixed feelings about this, but Wikidata, Wikipedia, the ecosystem, it gets 1 billion unique visitors a year. There is no way that the world is going to continue to ignore this. In fact, the attention is going to increase on Wikidata. Big tech is doing some things in Wikidata. I'd like to counterbalance that with more museums and more universities doing more things in Wikidata, and I really hope to see that. I've already mentioned social and ethics issues. I think that many people who have ethical issues about data, if they go into the Wikidata community, they're going to get insights. I won't say more about that, except that there's a lot of discussions going on. Third thing, we've already talked about this one as well, general reference data sets. If someone's got an authoritative data set on any topic of general interest, in the same way that Wikipedia is general reference prose information, Wikidata is your general reference data sets. You can get data for every city in the world, every biography in the world, every drug, anything that Wikipedia has an entry for. Wikidata has more of it in structured data. People can extract that and get access to the knowledge of institutions very rapidly through Wikidata in a way that's easy to digest and remix. And when you add all these things together, all this attention, social and ethical rules, and the data sets from traditional and conventional resources, then you also get absolute magic. In these things, you put all this in Wikidata, it mixes together and you get new creative data, remix data, things that would be unthinkable to create in any other way. It can only happen if you have everybody in the world, community representatives from all these institutions, socializing it in Wikipedia and Wikidata, remixing this, and then spreading it out. That's the big cookie.
I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more GLAMs coming onto the Wikidata space. I think my personal hope for what I do specifically, of course, comes from gaps and what's missing. I think there's a lot of potential for our community and for GLAMs in general to do more public community organizing around Wikidata. So like we do editathons on Wikipedia, for it to become a lot more common for offerings of trainings and editathons around Wikidata to happen. I really hope that's something that we're able to pilot, test, and make more normalized, not just within our own Wikimedia community, but in the wider GLAM academic and tech community, that this is a normal thing that's being offered, hosted, and that it's not just about contributing to Wikipedia, but Wikidata is inherently rolled into the way that we engage with editing, viewing, and thinking about Wikipedia, that all of these things are connected. And I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see that thinking really shift about the interconnectedness of the platforms.
These are some big, awesome thoughts. Thanks for indulging my question. This is fantastic. It feels almost promotional, but I think there is something inherently radical and very cool about Wikidata that no other database or knowledge graph or linked data repository has come close to achieving yet. And a big part of that has to do with the community and the humanity and kind of chewing through some of these larger problems in a really careful way, even though we're not there yet. And I know it's easy to just get lost in the inconsistencies and get overwhelmed by that. There's a lot of great stuff happening. So thanks for answering that question. Right now, I'm going to turn to the question and answer section of the webinar. So thank you for all of your responses for those of you attending. And keep the questions coming. We've got 10 minutes left, so don't hold back. So Samuel's asking about the relationship between Wikipedia and Wikidata. There's a Village Pump conversation exemplifying these concerns. Wikidata's poor UI, vandalism, sourcing. How can we address these issues between Wikidata and Wikipedia?
Oh boy, we could spend a whole hour just on this topic, right, Lane? I could see you nodding there. I mean, I'll tell you kind of my top three concerns I think around these conversations. One is, it astonishes me how many people point out the flaws in Wikidata they completely accept about Wikipedia. We can't use Wikidata, anyone can edit it, oh my God. Those complaints are kind of odd to me, let's put it that way. So anything of that nature, I almost always just zone out because I don't know where those folks are coming from. I mean, it might be that they came late to Wikipedia and they saw how awesome and kind of locked down it is now, but it grew in the early days. I've been around since 2003 by being bold and trying new things and being wrong and getting it right. So I think those kind of complaints are odd. The number two thing is, being English Wikipedian, I fear that English Wikipedia has this kind of arrogance that says, we've done it on our own this whole time. We can keep doing it on our own. Why would we want to incorporate Wikidata? Why would we want to incorporate the descriptions? We can write our own short descriptions, which is what it did. It went its own way and said, we don't want to share our short descriptions of articles with the world. We want it to ourselves. I think that was very problematic. And I think, unfortunately, that sets the tone for the willingness of English Wikipedia to incorporate. And the funny thing is, it's like, English Wikipedians cannot be that arrogant. You're missing a lot of stuff, English Wikipedians, and I'm English Wikipedian. You could learn a lot from what Poland and China and Japan have in their Wikipedia editions and also what's in Wikidata. So I think we need to kind of try to convince more folks that they need to be more open-minded about this, but I haven't seen a lot of turning of that ship in that direction. But I hope those conversations can turn more towards that. But I see a little bit too much arrogance in this area when, if you actually look over the fence at what's going on, there's amazing things happening that a lot of English Wikipedians don't even know about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those points. Thanks, Andrew. Shifting gears a little bit, Alex is wondering a little bit about AI and machine learning projects. How can we help folks who are reusing Wikidata's data to understand the context of its creation, even if they don't care about Wikipedia or Wikidata? It's problematic for people to reuse Wikidata and assume it reflects or represents a neutral world. Any thoughts on that?
It's problematic to use Wikidata. It's also problematic to use Wikipedia, but what are your alternatives? Who's doing better at this? Like, who else has convened the global community to get together and have conversations about this? I appreciate the criticism. There is no ideal data set out there, but where are you going to find one better? Who's going to give you a better one?
Well, the community is kind of designed to address these tricky issues. Like if you're concerned with provenance, for example, like you can put together a task force and like build out some blockchain thing and implement it. Like this is how Wikidata has come so far, is that problems appear and the community chews through them, albeit a little slower than we want, but at least they do. And you can usually read pages and pages of archives on talk pages about them. I see Christy's question about adding your own gender to a Wikidata item. I can answer that one quickly. It's okay as long as it's substantiated by a source. That's the standard for the gender property on Wikidata. So make sure that it's published somewhere. Sharon's asking a great question. How do you become a Wikimedian-in-Residence?
Oh, since we're all, I guess I guess I didn't realize we're all Wikimedians-in-Residence here in this discussion. The funny thing is there's no reproducible path. Every single engagement is its own thing, right? I think both of you would agree with me. So I hate to say there's no real formula for it, but part of it is trying to engage with folks who have a willingness to learn or are interested in learning. In fact, one of the folks in this chat here, Jake Orlowitz, is a master at arranging folks to be Wikimedians-in-Residence. Like he's helped a lot in his personal capacity and in a professional capacity. So maybe he has some advice in the chat there about these things. I don't know, Lane, what is your advice about Wikimedians-in-Residence and how to do it? And you, Kelly, you've been at 3 times or at least twice over. Right?
I've been a Wikimedian-in-Residence as my only job and profession. It's all I do since 2012. So been a while for me. Go to somebody and ask them to pay you to do it. So that's something that people have in common. How you convince them, I don't know. I don't have advice for that.
I don't know if I have advice about getting the position, but I think it's helpful to think of what are the areas of the wiki world that fit your interests and your skill set. So some Wikipedians-in-Residence are more forward facing. They do community programs and a lot of engagement, and some are more behind the scenes, batch uploading data and things like that. So you don't have to be a one size fits all Wikipedia expert or Wikipedia employee. Really hone in on where your skill set is, and again, your interest in the wiki world, because there's so many different ways to contribute to wiki. There's also so many ways to be a Wikipedian-in-Residence. So that would be my advice. Don't try to do everything. Do what your skill set is. So for me, it's community organizing and public programs and educational outreach, but I don't pretend that I can build bots and tools and do mass data pushes. And that's okay. We work together with people like Lane and Andrew to do those things.
I'll also chime in and add that having wiki skills are professional skills. For a lot of you attending, you do things that other people don't do in your line of work, and that's an asset. And we've had a lot of great comments from these panelists about measuring success and building out programs and what works really well. And you're all doing that, and it's just worth highlighting that to people who could pay you to be Wikimedians-in-Residence. Just kind of consolidate that a little bit.
You can also kill 2 birds with 1 stone. That we could use a lot more video documentation and tutorials about Wikidata, considering the tools are often changing, and there's so many different things you can do with the tools. So you could actually help with documenting, but it also gets you exposure out there, right? If people are Googling, how do I use quick statements, and they find a YouTube video of you demoing it for a data set, then you'll be, that much in front of someone's mind when they're looking for someone to be a Wikimedian-in-Residence as well.
Thanks for those responses. Sylvia asked a great question and shared some really excellent resources in Spanish about Wikidata. Thank you, Sylvia. But this question is about multilingualism in Commons, wondering if there's a way to model Wikimedia categories in Wikidata in multiple languages, which I think is just using Wikidata. It should just translate automatically. And it looks like there's a question about the translation table. And I'm not familiar with that. Maybe we can follow up later with that specific question. And then Zoe's asking a question, what do you see as the role of Wikidata versus individual Wikibase instances? Sometimes I feel like there's a tension between Wikidata and Wikibase when it comes to certain data, hoping that with the use of federated properties and items from Wikidata, we could get the best of both worlds regarding Wikibases.
Yeah, if you're interested in that more, I'd encourage you to go to Google and look for Wikimania and about Wikidata Birthday. As a conversation I had with Denny and Lydia about this, not only the 30, maybe 20, 30 minutes that we had, but there's also next hour after that, we talk about this, that the design of Wikidata was never to be this black hole vacuum of all data in the world. It was meant to be one database federated with lots of other databases, including Wikibases. So I completely agree with the questioner. Like, the ideal situation is not for Wikidata to be this gigantic monolithic thing that dictates everything, but that it can link to all these other databases out there. But for now, it kind of has to be, because not a lot of work is being done outside of Wikidata in these areas. So maybe that's what you were thinking about, Lane, in terms of like, yeah, Wikidata shouldn't be, but for now it has to be doing this.
All right, any other thoughts on that topic? If not, let me just take a moment to say one big thank you to Andrew, Lane, and Kelly for sharing your experiences and expertise and enthusiasm over this past hour to celebrate Wikidata's birthday. If you enjoyed these conversations, I've got good news for you. There are 3 more talks that we're hosting coming up each week in October. I think that information was dropped in the chat. Please attend. Please tell your friends to attend. Please bring your parents, families, pets, dogs, anyone who's willing to spend an hour with me and some other esteemed panelists. Please send them our way. If you want to get in touch with Kelly, Lane, or Andrew, we have their contact information. Please stay in touch. Please collaborate and keep celebrating Wikidata. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'll see you on Wikidata.